Welcome people to Real Stories UK. This is a story about Kelyan Bokassa, the 14-year-old boy killed, stabbed to death on a London bus. The last time Mary Bokassa saw her 14-year-old son alive was around lunchtime on his first day back to school after the Christmas holidays. She had no way of knowing that within an hour and a half her child would be dead, stabbed 12 times on a London bus in broad daylight in Woolwich, South London. And yet, as his mother explained in a bleak and haunted interview, his death was a shock but not a surprise. Her son Kelyan had been targeted by gang members trying to recruit him since he was 6 years old. She told the BBC, "I tried to prevent it. I tried so many times. I screamed it. I said my son is going to be killed, but the family hadn't," she said, got the help they needed. She had fought for her little boy and she had lost. And there is something about the way in which she said it that will have stopped parents across the country in their tracks. According to his mother, Kelyan was a caring boy and his teachers called him funny, kind and ambitious, but he was not an angel. He was an aspiring drill rapper. He had been expelled from school, spent time in care and lately got into trouble with the law. He was on the way to meet a social worker when he died, and according to the BBC, was due in court shortly himself on charges of carrying a machete. But he was also 14 years old, and every 14-year-old is someone's child and someone's baby. A kid who ought to be coming in from school to raid the fridge, getting nagged by his mum to do his homework, worrying about his first kiss or other things of that nature. We heard a lot over the past few days which described what had gone wrong for him. Kelyan, his mother said, had been groomed, and that adult criminal gangs are using increasingly sophisticated tactics to recruit school children. Should not be news to anyone. For years now, everyone from the National Crime Agency to children's charities has been warning about the threat posed to thousands of vulnerable children by county lines operating gangs or organised criminal networks expanding out of big cities into the suburbs and market towns as they seek a bigger market for drugs. Children's Commissioner and now Baroness Longfield pointed out in a report 5 years ago the parallels with what has happened to the young girls raped and trafficked by organised networks of older men in Rochdale and Rotherham are striking. Just as with the grooming gangs, it's the children already dealt with the most difficult hands in life, those with tough home lives, excluded from school or in care, who are cynically and systematically targeted by these gangs. Boys barely out of primary school are lured in with gifts of money, phones and trainers that their parents couldn't afford to buy them, and then they are told they must now work to repay what they owe, usually by moving drugs or moving money around the country. If they refuse, chilling levels of violence and intimidation follow. It's a form of trafficking in which adult gangsters maximise their profits by making children do their dirty work, and in some circumstances, drugs given to these children will be then robbed by an associate of the gang members, and the children will then end up in debt and be made to repay the debt. And Mary Bokassa is not the first mother to claim that when she tried to get her son back, the authorities let her down. After the 2017 murder of 14-year-old Corey Jr. Davis, known to his family as CJ, an official review found social workers in Newham, East London, had failed CJ when he confessed to them that he had been coerced by gang members into selling drugs. A bright boy who struggled with severe ADHD, CJ had been expelled from school and sent to a pupil referral unit used by gang members as a recruiting ground. Though he was so frightened, he had bought himself a bulletproof vest and a Rambo-style knife for protection. The inquiry heard that he had been treated like a criminal instead of social workers seeing him for what it really was, a child at risk of exploitation. Boys such as CJ aren't freely choosing a life of crime anymore, and children as young as 13-year-olds, like the ones in Rochdale, who were choosing, as some police officers wrongly concluded 2 decades ago, to become sex workers. And in both cases, what they need is swift protection from predatory adults. But it can be hard to see that hidden vulnerability beneath the surface of teenage boys, displaying bravado, groomed to become perpetrators as well as victims of violence. It's only when they're lying, bleeding on the pavement, crying for their mothers while some passing stranger holds their hand, that suddenly the world starts to see them as the children they still are. Kelyan is thought to have laid flowers a few weeks before he died for Dejan Campbell, who was stabbed not too far away in Woolwich last September. Dejan's death made the headlines in part because a woman who attempted to save his life remembered him crying out, "I'm 15, don't let me die." It's only when they're lying bleeding on the pavement, crying for their mothers, while some passing stranger holds their hand, that suddenly the world starts to see them as the children they still are. Kelyan is thought to have laid flowers a few weeks before he died for Dejan Campbell, who was stabbed not too far away in Woolwich last September. Dejan's death made the headlines. There are no easy answers here, and for a government elected on a promise to halve violent crime within a decade, but Scotland has in the past done exactly that, thanks to a public health-led approach focused on the root childhood causes of violent behaviour. Now the Home Secretary, Yvette Cooper, is leading a cross-government Young Futures unit designed to bring together the threads of everything that is happening in young people's lives, from a mental health crisis that may be aggravating offending rates to the loss of specialist youth services. One recent analysis from the Institute of Fiscal Studies calculated that teenagers in neighbourhoods where all the youth clubs in walking distance have been closed, as 30% of youth clubs in London did between 2010 and 2019, thanks mostly to budget cuts, were 14% more likely than their peers to have a criminal conviction. I just think that they need systems where the parents could get help before their children start going off the rails, and this needs to start from young, because after a certain age it becomes harder to get through to them. And in my opinion, they should be teaching children about these things in primary schools. It's a promising start, but the budget that Cooper has managed to scrape together for it doesn't yet seem to match the scope of the government's ambitions, and so far there is little movement for it to become a priority. But that, in turn, relies on all of us seeing that children at risk of gang exploitation is at an all-time high and is a major crisis. If not, there will be more mothers losing their children to these gangs or to similar situations like what happened to Kelyan Bokassa, dying in broad daylight in front of horrified adults, wishing only now that there was something more they could have done to help. It's another sad story, and one that we're seeing way too often these days. Rest in peace to Kelyan Bokassa. Thanks for watching, people. Don't forget to like, share, comment, subscribe, and stay tuned to Real Stories UK.